Well, hello, boys and girls. It's your favourite grumpy granny from Groggy's Patch, and I'm back again with another fascinating story from history. Because I want to tell you about my great-great-grandfather, who was actually from America and jumped ship here. He was a sailor and he jumped ship here to join the Victorian Gold Rush in 1853. So let's find out about him. His name was John Augustus Titus, and I'm going to keep referring to him as John Augustus because that's what I've naturally called him for the last few years. There are lots and lots of Johns in the family tree. There are lots of John Tituses in the family tree, so it just was easier because he's the only John Augustus Titus. Now, I discovered John Augustus Titus. He's actually my biological great-great-grandfather. I'm adopted, so I have my adopted family trees that I've done all the genealogical research on, and I have my birth family tree, which I've done quite a bit of research on, but, only half. I haven't even started delving into my mother's side. I've got lots of genealogy research left to do, which is great. When I found my birth family, I did discover that my brother Mike is also into genealogy, which is fantastic. And he handed me a lot of research about the family, and I started going through it and came across this person called John Augustus Titus. Quite a grand name, I think. But he lived in a very tiny township in what we call the Golden Triangle in Victoria, which I'll show you a map of later. And I've driven through that town I don't know how many times, and I talk about how small Donald is where I live. But Tarnagalla is probably quarter the size of Donald. It's tiny. But it is a mining town where they used to mine for gold. Unfortunately, I can't show you a photo of him because we have been unable to locate any photos of him, and you'll find out perhaps why that is later on in the story. But what I am showing you here is a picture of the Mayflower, and well, actually I think it's a reconstruction of the Mayflower, this one. And the reason I'm showing you this is because not only did he have an amazing life and was involved in a lot of things, we did also discover that he is actually a descendant of the Mayflower, which is quite a badge of honour, I might tell you. As much as we in Australia have a badge of honour of having convicts in the family, if you're an American, being a Mayflower descendant is also considered quite a badge of honour. Now, a little side note here. Before I'd found my birth family, I had done loads and loads of research. Like, I started doing genealogy when I was about 22. So I've been doing it for years. And I searched and I searched and I searched my family tree, my adopted family. I searched and searched and searched and searched for a convict. Do you think I could find one? No. Not a one. Not a one. Well, blow me down, I find my birth family. They're loaded with them. There's convicts everywhere. So that was pretty exciting. And not only that, but discovering that my great-great-grandfather came from America was also pretty exciting. I was really intrigued, one, that he was a gold miner, and two, to find out that he came from America. There was a downside to that, though. Because he was from America, I had to upgrade my Ancestry membership to a more costly one because the one I had was for Australia and the UK. So I did upgrade that. Now, John Augustus was born in 1822 in a little town called Westchester, in Westchester County, New York. Now, that area is what is commonly known as the Bronx in New York these days. So really, he came right from the centre of New York City in the state of New York. So that was really cool. Now, he's the second son and third child of Hannah Doty and William Titus. Now, Hannah's line is the one that goes back to the Mayflower. And my brother Mike and I thought it would be really cool to become members of the Mayflower Society. But, they're a bit posh. And, they wanted proof of every, you had to prove every conceivable paperwork trail all the way up. Now, we know from our DNA matches that we are descended from the Mayflower, but because of some of the civil wars in America and fires and other things in time in the Westchester area, there's just a space where there are missing records that haven't been able to locate. We will keep searching though. So, fingers crossed, and we will do it one day. Anyway, John Augustus had quite an exciting life. By the age of 16, he was in the American Naval Brigade, which American Navy actually, but back in those days it was called the American Naval Brigade. And we were actually quite, I shouldn't say lucky, but he did have some reoccurring health issues. He got admitted to some of the naval hospitals several times with a fever type thing. So whether he'd perhaps caught malaria or something like that, thank you Bronwyn for that tip, because that's possibly quite what it is. But the thing is that those naval records, those medical records, allowed us to keep a bit more track of him and where he was over time, more so than if he hadn't been sick. So let's go to here. In 1846, the Mexican-American War broke out, and that went until 1848. And John Augustus was still in the Navy at this stage, in the brigade. So during this time, he was aged between 23 and 25. The Mexican-American War was a conflict between the United States and Mexico, and it was fought from April 1846 to February 1848. Now, it started because of a dispute over the border between the United States and Mexico. And look, I'll go into the whole big story, but you probably don't need to know all that. But the result of the war was the US did win, and it was because of this they acquired a lot of extra land. A lot of that is now the southwestern United States, which includes California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. So there you go. The American Naval Brigade played a crucial role in this because they supported military operations along the coastlines and the rivers. They put blockades up on the Mexican ports to stop the Mexicans' ability to supply their troops. And because they weren't able to maintain trade, that put economic pressure on the Mexican government. And that was all part of how they managed to win. You'll see by the picture I've got here, which is showing the Naval Brigade crossing the bar at the mouth of the Tabasco River in Mexico in 1847. And you can see by the look of them, they are steamers. The brigade did lots of different things. The Naval Brigade actually did amphibious landings, and one of the most notable ones was at Veracruz in March 1847. Now, they bombarded the city, and then when the troops landed, enabled them to capture Veracruz, which was a vital port because it was a gateway to Mexico City. The Naval Brigade also transported troops, supplies and equipment along the coast and up the rivers, and that allowed the US Army to move more efficiently and maintain supply lines. There were a lot of major naval battles during this war, and because of the sea and a lot of the rivers, the Americans were actually able to show their dominance with the Navy and prevented Mexican forces from mounting effective counterattacks in the water. And look, that actually was integral to the US winning the war. Such a young bloke going through that is pretty amazing. The next time John Augustus pops up is in the Port of London. The Port of London was one of the busiest and most important ports in the world during the 1840s through to the early 1850s. And a lot of American seamen after the Mexican War, actually went over and became seamen over in the UK. And John Augustus is found living in boarding houses in Whitechapel, which is quite close to the port, in the English census of 1851. Now, there's a little bit of discrepancy here, so I'm not quite sure with the timeline how this all works out. But according to his obituary, he was also one of the very first to mine for gold in the California Gold Rush, which began in January 1848. So, because he did pop up in 1841 in the UK as well. So did he go back and forward, or is it a load of baloney? I don't know, because we have records of him in London in 1841 and again in 1851, but that's a big gap of 10 years. So it's very likely that he could have gone back for that, but there's no paperwork trail for that one, just family folklore. It appears in several publications that have been written about the family. It's all folklore and word of mouth. So look, I can only presume that it's true. So what happened next? Well, John Augustus decides he's going to come to Australia. Well, not really. What I'm assuming happened is that he had leave when they landed at Australia in 1853. And of course, that's in the middle of the major gold rush here in Victoria, which I'll show you where Victoria is and where the gold rush was shortly on those maps. John Augustus decided to jump ship and head for the central Victorian goldfields. And in amongst that time, on the 10th of April 1854, he's then 31 years of age and 8 months, and he marries a 17-year-old Tasmanian called Mary Wiggins, and she's the daughter of Thomas Wiggins, and he was a former convict, and he got sentenced to life for pickpocketing, but that was later changed to transportation to the colonies. So they got married at this beautiful church, which still looks exactly the same today, and it was the newly built Church of the Pioneers in 1854. Now, they began to build it about 1849, maybe 1847, I believe. By the time they'd finished building it, because there were so many people coming to the colonies then, it was way too small. This here is a map of Australia. And as you can see, everything's out, but now the little green dot down the bottom, that is Tasmania, the state of Tasmania, and that was a penal colony. And pretty much it was a great place for a convict colony because they couldn't escape very far because it was an island. And Van Diemen's Land, it was called back in the day, and stories are it was pretty harsh. And that's where Mary came from. But she wasn't a convict. She was born in Tasmania. By then, her father had served his sentence. Usually here, a life imprisonment may have been changed to, say, 7 years in the colony. So they had to serve, say, 7 years in the penal colony, and then they were actually given the freedom of being an Australian. This is Victoria, where I live, and you'll see that little golden triangle. Well, it's not little, it's big, isn't it? That is what we call the Golden Triangle, and that is in central Victoria. And right at the top, you'll see, if you look very closely, there's a little town called St Arnaud, and that's just up the road for me. And this is where a lot of the gold was found in Victoria. And this is where John Augustus and his wife Mary headed to once they were married, or maybe John was there before, not entirely sure. But they went to the Golden Triangle. The goldfields were pretty rough and rugged. I mean, I really feel for Mary because there were so many people rushing to the goldfields, and the authorities found it hard to keep control of everything. A lot of mud, a lot of digging holes. They lived in tents and then built like shanty type little houses and stuff. Yeah, I think it would have been a pretty harsh life for Mary. So they made their home in Chinaman's Flat, and that was what it was called. And that is now where Bendigo, which is a major rural city. That's about an hour and a half's drive from me, so it's not that far. But some of these pictures will give you a bit of an idea of what the goldfields were like. Now, when I first got this particular photo, I thought someone has gone and blanked out the people's faces, but they haven't. They're just so covered in mud, you cannot see their faces. So yeah, quite amazing. Now, here we have two documents to show you because there were some major things that happened during this time. Now, in 1851, the government introduced a gold licence. That was very unpopular with the miners, and they started protesting about it, and they had protests and petitions. One particular one was in 1854 at the Eureka Stockade in Ballarat, and some of you may have heard of this. About 500 miners built and occupied a fortress that became known as the Eureka Stockade. The government sent in soldiers to attack the stockade. The soldiers actually won the battle, killing 22 miners. And although the government won, I think they realised that these gold licences were not going to work. So what they did was they abandoned the gold licence and replaced it with a much fairer thing, which is the smaller document, which is a miner's right. And because I don't have photos of John Augustus and Mary, I've just got some general pictures of the goldfields as I go through their story. Chinaman's Flat was literally nothing. It was a paddock, a field that was used for farming, and some people found some gold, and then everybody else started rushing there to find more gold, and it was no longer a paddock, it became a town. So I had to stop everything and restart the computer and let it cool down and all that sort of stuff. Hopefully I've come back right at the right spot. At Chinaman's Flat, and I guess on most of the goldfields, entertainment was very important because after a long day of digging, carting soil and rock, washing it in pans and cradles, the diggers were keen to enjoy themselves and let their hair down. So they'd sit around the campfire telling stories, singing and playing music. They celebrated their successes, forgot their disappointments. But once the goldfields became more established, there were theatres and music halls for the diggers to go to. And on Sundays and holidays, there were special sports events like cricket, football, horse racing, quoits matches and boxing matches. And so prize fighting was a big thing, and it was a very popular activity on a Sunday. So the diggers would stand around in a circle, forming a temporary ring, and shout their encouragement to their favourite fighter, of course, and no doubt they would have had a bet or two on them. The competitors didn't wear boxing gloves. They fought bare-fisted and could actually finish up badly hurt. But if they were successful, they could actually win some big prizes. John Augustus finished up getting himself quite involved in the prize fighting in one particular instance, and this was in June 1857. But before I tell you the story about that, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. I found this quite interesting article, which is in a sporting newspaper that was published in Victoria at the time, and they used to have a section called The Ring in each issue, and that was all about the prize fighting. This was a match that was at Chinaman's Flat, but this was a little bit before the one that I'm going to tell you about. And this was between Joseph Kitchen and William Melody. The article goes on to say, William Melody and Joseph Kitchen agree to fight. And so what would actually happen is the rules and everything would get published in the paper. There were different rules for each match, and it was basically the fighters needed to agree to it. William Melody and Joseph Kitchen agreed to fight a stand-up fight on Tuesday, April 24th, 1857, in the new rules of the London Prize Ring. So they're finding out what the rules were in London. William Melody staking £250 to Joseph Kitchen's £200. So that's a lot of money. You were doubling your £250 and coming away with an extra 200 if you won. And what would happen, they'd pay deposits over a period of time to whoever was holding the stake money. And this quite often happened to be the reporter from the newspaper. The first deposit of £25, I should say, on the part of William Melody and £20 on the part of Joseph Kitchen is this night placed in the hands of T. Greville at the People's Hotel, Chinaman's Flat. The second deposit of the same amount is to be paid to the hands of Martin Ronan Elmer on Tuesday, February the 24th. And it basically goes down and tells you when you've got to pay the different deposits. So we'll miss all that because there's quite a few, because it's a big amount of money. So they got to pay it off, basically. So I think, so we're up to 6 there. Where are we? The 7th paid to William Flowers, etc., etc. The last and final deposit of £50 to 40 paid into the hands of Thomas Curran of the Butcher's Arms Hotel, Denali, on Saturday, 11th of April. The editor of Bell's Life in Victoria is to be the final stakeholder, unless it's mutually agreed by the boxers to the contrary. Neither man is to weigh over 11 stone 7 pound. The men to go to scale the evening before the fight at the People's Hotel, Chinaman's Flat, between the hours of 7 and 9. The men are to be in the ring on the morning of the fight between the hours of 10 and 12. Note that they don't specify a particular time. I'll explain that in a minute. And then the fight is to take place over 10 and within 15 miles of Chinaman's Flat. Now, the reason for that is because this prize fighting was not legal, and the police were always trying to shut it down because it would create this huge crowd, gambling and all sorts of things, and fights would break out and all sorts of things. So they would not specify exactly what time the fight was, but I'm guessing if they said between 10 and 12, that the boxers would have known what time that meant, and it meant that it was probably 11, I don't know. And the same with where it was going to be held. So it had to be held within over 10 miles from Chinaman's Flat, but within 15 miles of Chinaman's Flat. And that again was so that the cops wouldn't find them. Umpires and referees will be chosen on the ground, and the referee's decision is to be final. Either party failing to comply with the above agreement is to forfeit all monies down, except through magisterial interference. Each deposit is to be made before 10 o'clock in the evening, and the battle money is not given out until the fight is over. So they are the prize rules. Bear with me while I get rid of that. So it's quite involved and quite interesting, but they were getting around the police coming and, stopping them from doing these fights because such big money involved. So here is an illustration by an artist of the time of what the prize fighting actually looked like on the goldfields. And I did look at a few different renderings, but this one to me probably was more realistic. A lot of the others were a bit stylised and pretty, like the previous one. We'll just go back one. That one shows that it's, there's no actual ring. It's people standing around and that type of thing, but it doesn't actually show the rawness of it, of what this one does. So we'll leave it on that one because I think that one's pretty fitting. But what we're going to do is dive in a little bit. So this is where this prize fight starts that my great-great-grandfather got involved in. And, well, it's not actually where it quite starts. So there is a fighter called John Burke who has said that he is retired after fighting a chap and winning, and that fighter's name was Lampierre. And apparently, even though he says he's retired, his mouth hasn't retired. So he's blowing off or making comments about, disparaging comments about other fighters. I actually think, and looking at his history and the many more matches that he does, I actually think he is doing this purely as a way of getting these people to actually challenge him to a fight, because there's big money in this. And so I'll just blow it up a little bit. Not sure it's right there. This one's only a short one. So there was a publication at the time called Bell's Life in Victoria and Sporting Chronicle. It only ran from 1857 to 1868. There was one in New South Wales and one in Tasmania. I'm not sure. And there were other states there were ones too. So essentially this had all the information about horse racing, any type of sporting thing, quoits matches, boxing matches, all that type of thing. And so in response to John Burke mouthing off about another fighter, Fred Smith, actually decides he's going to challenge this John Burke to a fight. So he writes a letter to the editor of Bell's Life. And the letter goes, headline, challenge to Burke. To the editor of Bell's Life in Victoria. Sir, I hear that John Burke, alias Flash Burke, has been blowing at Ballarat as well as at Chinaman's Flat. Now, Mr. Editor, and blowing was a term that they used for fighting because they were trading blows. I did learn that. I've learned a lot about prize fighting back in the day. Now, Mr. Editor, allow me to inform you that Lampierre was in no way competent to fight Burke as he has been labouring under a severe indisposition for some months past, and I think it a great pity that he, as in Burke, should retire from the prize ring with such self-created honours. So he's basically saying, all right, you might have really well and truly beat Lampierre, but it wasn't a fair fight because he was unwell. I am open to fight Burke for £50 or £100 at any time he wishes, and if my weight exceeds 10 stone on entering the ring, I will forfeit the money, and I will give Burke his own weight. Unless he accepts this challenge, I shall consider him a gas pipe, and the greatest coward that ever disgraced the prize ring. I am, sir, yours respectfully, Fred Smith, written from Chinaman's Flat, February the 19th, 1857. P.S. Man and money ready at the Alliance Hotel, Regent Street, Chinaman's Flat. No date or anything, but I guess he's going to wait and see if there is a response from our friend Mr. Burke, which of course there is. So then, I think it's 2 weeks later, we find this in Bell's Life. We find this letter in Bell's Life. Another letter to the editor, entitled The Ring, Challenge Accepted. To the editor of Bell's Life in Victoria. Sir, in perusing last week's Bell's Life, I observed a letter from Fred Smith, in answer to which I beg to say that, although I have retired from the prize ring, as published in your valuable columns, of which no doubt Fred Smith has had the cowardice to avail himself, still, sooner than allow such a nincompoop to boast, and in order to take a little of the self-created conceit he boasts about out of him, I will once more condescend to step into the ring and try to take a little of the flashness out of him. I am, therefore, open to fight him in 7 weeks from the payment of the first deposit for from 100 to 500 aside. Man and money ready at the Harp and Shamrock, Piccadilly Street, Chinaman's Flat. If he does not accept this challenge, I'll foot him like a stranger's over our threshold. I am, sir, yours respectfully, John Burke, Piccadilly Street, Chinaman's, 4th of March, 1857. Then we go on. This one is then the following week. In Bell's Life. Letter to the editor. Sir, I read a letter in your paper from John Burke accepting my challenge. But as I am at present in Melbourne training young Pollock, I shall not be able to give him an opportunity of condescending to foot me like a cur till after this fight. John Burke knows very well that, although I am in town, the match can be made either at the Alliance or Rigby Hotel, if he means fighting, which I and friends of mine very much doubt. Before I conclude this note, allow me to observe that the way challenges are given and accepted, the boastful style they are worded, are not exactly in accordance with the custom at home, and I hope in future they will be a little bit more gentlemanly. I am, sir, yours respectfully, Fred Smith, Manchester Inn, Queen Street, because he's in Melbourne. And I find it a bit laughable after what he has said about calling Burke a coward in the first letter. And then when Burke responds, now he's saying that Burke needs to be a little bit more gentlemanly. So this was dated 21st of March, this one. And then we're going to go on to 30th of May. Also in the Bell's Life, The Ring. There's very little mention of boxing of these matches in any of the other papers. I'm kind of feeling like that's perhaps because they didn't want to, speak too much out loud about it because it was against the law. And you may be wondering why I'm telling you all this, but I'm sort of leading up to where John Titus comes into the story. So The Ring, we go down a bit further, and it says, extraordinary arrest. On Tuesday evening last, Fred Smith was arrested on a charge of contemplating a breach of the peace. Now, I'm guessing guessing that that charge, contemplating a breach of the peace, is what the police were using to charge them with if they were going to have a fight. I'm not entirely sure, but that's my guess. It goes on. He was brought up at the Maryborough Police Court on Wednesday and was about to be bound over in his own recognizances, I can't even say that word, of £50 for 6 months when Mr McDermott, who appeared for the defence, objected on the ground that a magistrate was not justified in entertaining the charge unless the party who laid the information was willing to swear that he was afraid of personal assault. Eventually, Smith was discharged to the great satisfaction of a crowded court. So there are a few cheers in the court that this had happened. And just underneath that we have Burke and Smith. Another deposit of £60 was made good at Lee's Bird Hotel on Monday evening last. The final deposit is to be made on Friday evening next at the Bull and Mouth, Denali, when the men will toss for the choice of ground and the arrangements for the fight to come off on Monday will be completed. Both men are in fine condition and there is every prospect of a first-class mill. Smith, under the able training of Tom Wren, is taking his breathings at the Bet, being well cared for at Lee's public house, while Burke, under the management of the accomplished Fox, is located at the Erringabra on McCallum's Creek. And finally, we get to the actual fight. So here we have again in Bell's life, and this is dated the 6th of June. Fight between John Burke and Fred Smith for £400 from our Maryborough correspondence. And it goes on. A more than ordinary amount of interest has been excited by this fight. The arrest of Smith, as reported in our previous issue, was as if it were an omen of ill luck, and we regret to say has been fulfilled. The fight having been brought to an abrupt conclusion in the second round by a foul blow from Burke. A great deal of excitement was created by this occurrence, and a scene of riot ensued, which we never saw before, and trust never shall see again displayed in the ring. The blow was one of those right-hand round-body blows which Burke is frequently in the habit of delivering, and which struck Smith about 4 inches below the belt in the right groin. Ouch. Immediately on being struck, he held up his hands and the referee declared it to be a foul and the battle over.